Hello, special welcome to our flagship studio conversation at the JPM Health Conference 2024 on creating a global life sciences ecosystem. I am chair of Flagship Pioneering in Asia and have the pleasure and honor to moderate a session with two very accomplished individuals and practitioners. It's Professor Lucy Chappell from London and Professor Sze Wee from Singapore. Shortly we'll introduce you, or we'll ask you to introduce yourself. But before, I would like to also ask the audience here in the room, we have a full house, to turn off your phones and be mindful, because this session is being, there's a live stream and it's being recorded. So thank you for being here, and we look forward to a great conversation and discussion. Lucy and Sze Wee, it's really a great pleasure and honor to have you with us. I was looking at your impressive CV and I saw a lot of commonalities. And if I may say, what I see is both of you have been leaders in the space of life sciences and creating an ecosystem in your respective countries. And you have played multiple roles that build and reinforce each other, starting from setting the strategy, from directing the funding of research, from interacting with startups and the private sector, advising politicians, and even practicing as medical doctors. So having a feel firsthand with patients what's going on. I would appreciate if you start introducing yourself quickly, and would ask Lucy to start.
Thank you, André. So I'm Lucy Chappell. I'm Chief Scientific Advisor at the UK Government Department of Health and Social Care. And with that comes Chief Executive Officer of the National Institute for Health and Care Research. So that's the R&D funding arm of the government and across the NHS. And also as a Director General in the Civil Service, I'm one of two Director Generals with responsibility for the Office for Life Sciences, which is a joint enterprise, crucially, between the Department of Health and Social Care and the Department for Science, Innovation and Technology, representing really where OLS, that Office for Life Sciences, sits. I'm also a Professor of Obstetrics in my side job. I'm a clinical trialist in that role, and I'm still a practicing obstetrician in the NHS.
So how do you find the time to do all of this?
Well, it's great to be out at JPM because I think it brings together so many of those roles. And I've had many exciting conversations over the last few days, which really show why a conference like this is so important.
Excellent. Thank you for being with us, Lucy. Appreciate it. Sze Wee.
Well, André, and thank you to Flagship for the kind invitation and the opportunity to participate in this very interesting dialogue. My name is Sze Wee, last name is Tan, first generation Singaporean and public health physician by training. But my current role within A*STAR is the Assistant Chief Executive for the Biomedical Research Council, as well as a Senior Advisor to the Innovation Enterprise Division. I have been involved in public sector in the health ministry, corporate role in the multinational. I also spent a time in spin-out as well, truly understanding the whole value chain of taking innovation into outcomes. And what I've done together with A*STAR the last 15 years is to be able to experience many parts of this across both biomedical science, but also extending into physical sciences, in the digital, because we are starting to see the convergence of multidisciplinary approach. And it's very exciting to see now many parts of the technology can be brought together to solve unmet medical needs. And this is where I would say that there is a like-mindedness, as we had the fortune of the opportunity to work with Flagship as its chosen Singapore as its Asian location. And together with Lucy, I think together we can also think about how we can continue with this mode of public-private partnership, and also the international collaboration mode as well.
No, excellent. And actually, we have chosen also London as our European hub.
Yes.
So it's therefore even, I would say, more relevant that you're here. So we can discuss actually what are the relative strengths of your own ecosystem. How would you describe that, Lucy?
So I think the UK is extremely well positioned, and I think that's sort of the fact that, as you say, Flagship chose to come to London and Singapore really shows off those strengths. For me, it's about four things, and there are interdependencies across all of them. So there's the really strong science foundations. We've chosen to invest in our science infrastructure and our talent, our workforce in that area, and the fact that we've got 4 of the top 10 world universities, it shows that off. The second one is our sort of clinical research delivery that really stretches into the NHS, our National Health Service. And we know that companies and many investigators really value what that single health service enables, for example, from data, but really through so that we see the adoption and the implementation of treatments, diagnostics, and so much more. The third pillar I see is our agile and our innovative regulatory approach. We've seen what the MHRA, our Medicines and Healthcare Regulatory Agency, can do. And I think there are also real synergies because our regulatory agency works in partnership with Australia, Canada, Singapore and Switzerland, so that we are seeing huge opportunities that may come from that regulatory options. And then the fourth, which is just as crucial, is our really strong business environment. And we've seen repeatedly how our government and our Chancellor has prioritised this. So in the last autumn statement, really set out ambitious funding packages to say that the UK, we really want the UK to be open for business, particularly in life sciences, across the whole range, sort of pharma, tech, digital. And so the Flagship Pioneering has chosen to come to London, and we really want to capitalise on what all of that ecosystem can bring, and to say, how do we make it possible to improve the health and the wealth of our nation through these partnerships, but not looking inward, looking outward very much as well.
Excellent. So hopefully after this session, you will add Singapore as a fourth collaboration country.
I very much hope that, I mean, we already work with Singapore,
yes.
and we were just discussing this earlier. And I think we can come back to where do those international collaborations add so much more. I mean, I think an example actually we might come to talk to is COVID. So we're never going to tackle whether it's COVID or any of the other big healthcare challenges in a silo. And I think by being able to pivot at speed, at pace and scale, for example, on our vaccines or our therapeutic options for COVID, we showed off what was possible, but we shouldn't stand still. We should be saying, look at all the other health needs. We've got healthcare missions that really speak to that, led by the Office for Life Sciences, which say, if we can achieve those improvements in our healthcare offer, then how do we do that for so many other unmet needs?
Fully agree. So thank you very much. We'll come to the COVID question. I have a COVID question specifically, but before to Sze Wee to introduce Singapore.
Yeah, so you would think that everyone, if you have been traveling, and Singapore is usually one of the stopping points into Asia. But I would say that the Singapore government has been very committed to continue to develop ways of growing its economy. As a small country with no natural resources, what we do have is human capital. And about 25 years ago, we decided that we have to move up the value chain. And with that, started to invest significantly in research and development, R&D. So the whole aspects of R&D is really a whole value chain, what we call research, innovation, enterprise, is starting to, first of all, understand what is good science. And followed by having the good science, how to come up with good technology, good knowledge. But it doesn't end there. You will have to be able to develop into good products, good services in good companies, which ultimately will have to generate economic activity for us in Singapore, generate jobs and growth, to which hopefully then they generate taxes and the cycle feeds through again. I mean, this is a very pragmatic way we look at it in Singapore, the business model. But to be able to do that, we really have to think about how we differentiate because we're very, very small. And this is where I would say that for Singapore, which even though we're a population under 6 million, we do have the representation of the Asian phenotype. And we do think that we can be a site to which we can understand Asian biology better and going deep And we have seen how some of this have manifested in different ways of presentation of cancers. GI cancer is very different in Asians. Metabolic conditions are very different in Asians. You have lean diabetics. You also have issues with degenerative conditions that's very different. So I think that's the value we add to the rest of the world, to which we can do that. The other thing that we also want to do is to be able to help not just with the science, but also the ability to make the products and manufacturing as well. So this is something that Singapore is something not well known, except you think of we have banks and tourism. In fact, the largest sector in Singapore is manufacturing. 1/5 of our economy is actually manufacturing, and biomanufacturing, both drugs and medical devices, contributes a significant portion of that. And this is where I think that going through the whole value chain, again, Lucy talked about it, played up during COVID. We were able to make COVID test kits. We are able to understand what we need to do to understand about the vaccines, of which we do know now that both Moderna and BioNTech are also coming in. WuXi is also coming in. I think there is a lot that we can add, even though we are small, but we can actually integrate the whole value chain. To do that is really about the talent. How do you bring the very aspects of talent that you see in this part of the world that you have? But I think there is a huge opportunity because Asia is also one of the fastest growing regions of the world. And there is still a lot of medical needs, medical conditions, to which I think there's a lot of opportunity we can work closer together as well.
Excellent. So I think see the common theme, I think starting from a very strong research and R&D foundation, I would say academic institutions, very strong. I think UK globally, Singapore regionally and globally, starting on, and I think I was reading the recent PISA study, which is not for younger students, but Singapore is rated 1, so I think it's catching up, I would say, on that end too. Plus, both of you stressed already some collaboration opportunities with other countries, like be it Switzerland and Canada, and also outside in Singapore. And you cited both also COVID as a special situation. So perhaps I focus on this COVID topic, because to me, suddenly things were possible during COVID. And suddenly, I would say global collaboration was accelerated. The way I think the development from the research results to the drug and the manufacturing was accelerated. The regulatory was adapted to the need. What is your sense? Are we continuing on that path, or are we falling back into the pre-COVID state?
That's such a good question. I think it's something that keeps a lot of us are thinking about. So what did we see in COVID? I think we saw in the very early phases a couple of really key things. The first is that the reason we moved so quickly is because of that foundational funding. And I think we have to keep on remembering that what we do in peacetime then comes to play when you're faced with a pandemic. And what we should be doing in this sort of when we're coming out of this phase of the pandemic is thinking how to invest smartly for the challenges we're facing. For example, other emerging infectious diseases, with the impact of climate change on those, and so that drives investment by many life sciences companies to say there's a need here and now. And you take an area like antimicrobial resistance, we don't have to wait for another pandemic to see that the importance of that. So that foundational infrastructure allowed us in sort of February, March 2020 to pivot our clinical research system to say, let's go at this with real speed. So both the vaccines work that we'd invested in, particularly through the Oxford team, and also the treatments, the recovery trial, which looked at treatments, as that happened to be the national pregnancy lead for recovery. So I saw how we stood that up and how it led to dexamethasone moving from a clinical trial to thousands of participants, and it went into clinical practice on a Tuesday afternoon as the results came out. So we then take that and say, what did we learn from all of those stages? And as I say, as you've mentioned, really underpinned by the regulation, but also by collaboration between life science companies, academics and government policy, all of those coming together. So we need to harness all of that and not slip back to our pre-pandemic ways, but say, how do we take this further? And we should think about how we do that, for example, in areas such as diagnostics, as well as the more obvious sort of treatments and vaccines, and how we're constantly challenging ourselves to apply science, which is moving rapidly, into some of these new areas. So I think we have to look both at infectious diseases, but also how we learn in a very cross-disciplinary way to go into the non-communicable diseases, and which will really, again, come back to sort of some of the big health challenges, whether it's cancer, dementia, mental health, and say we've got so many opportunities that we've learnt and really which we're doing through our healthcare missions, to take those on. And then to also look outwards to say, where can we learn from partners, both in science, but also, I think on the international collaboration stage, there are a couple of sort of flavors of that. One is, for example, in rare diseases, where you can say, well, that's small numbers, so we're clearly going to have to partner. But also, if you think about some of these areas like non-communicable diseases, we've heard how we could harness what is happening in the UK and in Singapore to look at that diversity and see that as an opportunity, both ethnic diversity, but diversity in many other ways, to address some of these problems. And I hope that we can do more of that. Flagship Pioneering and the group of companies that it looks after, you look at what Moderna did, I mean, which is a very obvious sort of a company where we really learnt from all their foundational science and came to the fore. But there are so many other opportunities across the flagship group that we can pivot and really see that going forward.
No, excellent. So it's I think the same question to you, but just adding one part to it. How can a collaboration with a leading, I would say, player like Flagship Pioneering help in that process? And especially during COVID, I was in Singapore during that time, and I thought Singapore did an excellent job handling that.
Yes.
Perhaps you can describe what Singapore did and what are the learnings from your perspective, and what will be applied going forward.
André, in fact, we had this conversation a couple of days back as we are trying to prepare for this session, and I was commenting that we really didn't appreciate the value that Moderna brought, because I was part of the planning group with helping the senior leaders back in the dark days, obviously in 2020 and 2021. And back at that time, the scenario, the vaccine will only be coming out in 2024, and we didn't even envisage be able to get out into the air until 2026. And yet, we're all here, And the value of that creates for the global economy is phenomenal, beyond, of course, what Moderna got its own reward as to be able to sell its vaccines. But I think what is more important is to be able to share that, at least in Singapore, we have the ability with a very closely knit ecosystem, both from the political leadership together with the academic leadership, together with industry, to really think about how evidence and science could be brought to bear to influence policy. It wasn't easy because typically Singapore, being small, would like to follow others. And typically you like to do that because if something goes wrong, you won't be blamed because someone has practiced it. But at the time, there was not a lot of information going around. It was really who could basically be followed. And we were very fortunate that I would say the decades of investment in biomedical science gave us a cadre of knowledge to which in their international linkage were able to give us some sense that there could be something interesting from the RNA side on top of what's available as well. But what I would like to just highlight is not just about science, not just about regulatory, it is also the ability to communicate, is to convince the individuals, the citizens, because at the end of the day, it was how we put the vaccine in every arm. And there was a struggle at the time because we do know that the elderly are highly vulnerable. And unless we could get them vaccinated, 90% vaccinated, we are basically going to get implosion in the ICU, and it was a physical logistics. But we were able to do it very well as part of the whole community with the support of the NGOs, with the support of civil society. And I think this is where it takes a tremendous effort to just highlight that, at least in Singapore, we could show how this can be communicated and implemented, primarily from a public health perspective. I think this is something now that we're coming to peacetime mode. We are preparing, obviously, for the next pandemic at the national level. We are also preparing ourselves, really thinking about population health. And population health is really about thinking about early diagnosis, prevention, is using technologies, is using wearables, is trying to be able to go down with data and digital down to the individual, n equals to 1, because I was just at another event and someone was talking about the way we are thinking about treatment modalities is very cross-sectional, but we never think about longitudinal for one. For example, you're taking a hypertensive at 30 years old. What happens when you are 40? What happens when you're 50 or 60? You may not have to take the same dose, but you're just taking the same dose because it's how it's designed. So there are things that we still haven't figured out. I think there's a lot of innovation because the data is becoming more prevalent, and with the participation with technology, with data, and with primarily if you can get the individual to trust that this will come back to him or her, and this is what we showed in Singapore, I think this is where value can be created, and we do want to show that in Singapore, with partnership with UK and in Flagship and other partners, we are able to develop a new model which is value-based healthcare, which is a sustainable way of keeping everyone healthy and well.
Yeah, no, thank you. I think
Can I just pick up briefly?
Please.
So I think one of the things that you've touched on that I think is crucial is, for example, the role of behavioural science and social science. And then thinking that what else do we have to learn? So, for example, from our colleagues in engineering. And we cannot operate in this sort of very narrow biomedical model anymore. You think of what we can learn from the chemists, from the engineers, from the behavioural scientists. The opportunities are just huge. And I think there's another aspect, which is the economic and social side. So I think COVID showed that. And I think if we see how we work in a cross-disciplinary way, I think I've certainly heard had lots of interactions in the last couple of days where that's really, you look at drug discovery, you look at the role that AI is playing in drug discovery, and then I can go to the work that we're funding, for example, in assisted technologies for independent living in the older population. And we need to go and find our engineers, or sometimes our system engineers, to say, come and help solve these problems. We are going to do that so much better. We go back to the topic of preventative medicine, which again, if we solve through a sort of very narrow single disease, single drug model, we're going to be left behind. So I think we see all of these opportunities opening up for us, and we really rely on a much greater range of companies than we might have sort of interacted with. So, and across all of these disciplines.
In fact, on top of behavioral science, there is also the realization the world is heating up. For example, last year the world heated up. What's going to be the effect of that, in the human race going forward? Will that change some of our developmental biology? And we don't know, And that's where I think that medicine is no more when you're sick. It's going to be from in utero, as you grow up, because it's epigenetic changes while the mother is carrying you. And what happens to the mother by the environment and what she eats and what she thinks, it has shown that it actually is coded into the unborn baby. And we have cohort, well-known cohort called Gusto that we follow up from childhood to now they're teenagers, and there are changes that we are still observing, for example. So we think that there is a lot of opportunity with multidisciplinary of social science, with even nutrition, with even the environmental influence, which I think it's going to be very, very exciting how this can be brought in. It's just that I think the question is how to incentivize all the different fields to come together as well, because they tend to be currently quite siloed. I think there are ways that we've seen that during COVID, if there is a big enough challenge, everyone does put their pens down and focus on it. I think when we talk about how global warming can affect the way how we live and also affect our children and our children's future. So I think people are prepared to put down their differences and work together.
Yeah, well, fully agree, and I'm smiling because my daughter received her PhD actually in health sciences, focusing on psychology, and that's exactly the topic. And there are completely new insights coming out if you look through that lens in the treatment of patients and also the success and how you cover not only the patient but their support system, because that's important. And I think this multidisciplinary aspect, because we talk here about creating a global ecosystem, we usually think global is just geography, but global is multiple disciplines. It is multiple, I would say, institutions from academia, public sector, private companies, and it is multiple competences.
Yes.
And I think, as you know, Flagship announced the collaboration with Thermo Fisher as a partnership with Samsung. These are like in other areas, but I think that's exactly the idea behind it. And our founder, Nubar Afeyan, has this notion of designing an ecosystem proactively yourself, as opposed to waiting until it emerges, because usually it takes too long. And my question to you is whether you subscribe to that notion, and if you do, in your shoes, what would be the immediate ecosystems that you would tackle in terms of prioritization?
Gosh, and I was really interested to read what he was talking about the polycrisis as well. In the polycrisis which we're facing is probably the right time to look at the opportunities where, and I think we've seen that across R&D. There were things working and they were good, but actually when you stress the system, then it's time to say, are we really happy with things, or do we want to be a bit more disruptive? I think we recognize some of the inertia in our systems, but I think there are also challenges, and we should say, what can we do differently? And how do we sometimes make small changes which add up, but sometimes you need the willingness to be more experimental. And as a government funder, I think that it's up to us to have a concept of a portfolio that has things with different risk appetite. It comes back also to the very sort of realistic view of where we interact with policy and who has what levers to change those ecosystems. I think what I've really learned since I've been in post is that often there is no single person or organization that owns all bits of the ecosystem. So some of what I do is to try and get everyone operating as a team, not in a sort of cozy echo chamber, because I think our job should be to challenge each other and want to go faster. I am really heartened by what I've heard over these last few days, where there are people trying to do that. And my job is sometimes to either be an enabler or to get out of the way and to remove some of the barriers and to remove some of that sort of, we've always done it like that. We are facing challenges in our health and care system in the UK. This is the opportunity where we have to embed research and innovation even more. We cannot carry on doing what we've always done. And I think that we need to get patients and our workforce and our system on board with that research and innovation being it's everybody's business and it's part of everyday care. We should all want that. And that is the change I would like to see, that we just normalize that participation in research and innovation so that we move forward faster.
That's an excellent point. Do you agree, Sze Wee?
Yes, and I would say that a lot of that will be useful if you do have the ability to have a long-term view. Because I think sometimes, especially in biomedical science, it takes a long time to see impact. And in Singapore, I think the fact that even though we are small, we have demonstrated that we could accomplish things that is kind of stacked against us. If you think about having location that is smaller than Manhattan, and you don't even have your own water, don't even have your own energy, you won't even appreciate you could even survive. That was about close to more than a few decades ago. But today, for example, we are entirely self-sufficient on water. We are able to use a challenge using technology and develop our own technology to be able to become self-sufficient in just water, for example. And that is really trying to use science and tech as a means to allow us to bypass our physical limitations. So using that per se, how do we use that to which the natural constraints of labor, energy, land is not a limit to what we can basically achieve. It's really intellectual capital. And I think this is where Singapore has shown that we can do that. We're going into quantum. We invest quite a fair bit into AI. Just about a month ago, Jensen Huang, someone you know from his famous NVIDIA and is doing very well, has publicly mentioned he's going to put a supercomputer probably in Singapore. We are going into areas of sustainability because we do have to think about how we create energy sustainability as well. So many of these are natural constraints upon us as a city-state. I would say that even though we are small and we do not have the hinterland to which you get a return investment, but working with Singapore, and of course, ASA is the national R&D organization to convert R&D to economic impact for our partners, is the world is your oyster, And of course, nearby within Asia is Southeast Asia, close to about 500 million people, and of course, very close to both the big continents of China and India. There's a huge opportunity for all to work through, and we are very close, and not just for Asia, but for the world as well. And therefore, I think the way we are trying to be a value partner, and of course with Flagship and UK and other partners as well, is how do we connect as the global science and tech and the research innovation enterprise value chain. And this is where I think it will have to be a common outcomes together. We really liked Nuba's What If backwards, because I think this was how our founding Prime Minister Lee Kuan Yew was what if that became what we are today. So I think we can still do a lot more, and the ambition, the outcome is just the limits of our imagination. But we do believe that we can do this in a pace that is a lot more holistic, sustainable, and equitable for everyone together.
Excellent. Quoting Lee Kuan Yew, he was also a big proponent of talent and mentorship and talent development. And you mentioned that, and also Lucy, that talent is extremely important. How can we develop talent that is capable to overcome these barriers or the silos that exist in organizations across sectors, across industries, across nations?
So for me, one of the keys is to look at equity and diversity. And it echoes one of the workshops that was here yesterday, where you're saying you're not doing it because it's a tick box, you're doing it because it's driven by the science. And for me, that's so crucial. So for me, it's about that cognitive diversity that is often mirrored by that demographic and other diversity. And I think there should be a virtuous circle between that across your researcher workforce or your science workforce, but also how we approach, for example, clinical research, clinical trials. And it's what we're seeing, sort of certainly our approach in the UK, to say that talent pipeline should look at those areas of equity, but it also bleeds into how do we approach looking at some of these solutions, saying, if we have a very narrow view and if we go into clinical research sort of trying to do it the easy way, we'll have missed the point that we won't get impact for our populations unless, both from a talent point of view and from a sort of involvement of on a much more equitable basis, our solutions will stay on the shelf. So I think it's sort of that for me is the guiding star to achieving greater impact.
Thank you. See if
Well, I
anything
would
you would
say
like to add.
that we talk about talent. Just to highlight that in the traditional Asian family perspective, all mothers want their kids to be doctors and lawyers, right? And therefore, it has always been a challenge to get the brightest of Singaporeans to pursue a career in STEM, you know. But I think in Singapore, over the last, I would say, 20 years, we have succeeded. We've funded the brightest of Singaporeans to pursue academic career, training in a top university across the world. This is done through A-Star. Close to about 2,000 has been sponsored for undergraduate as well as postgrad studies that have come back. 1/3, I think, slightly over half have come back. Many of them are infected with entrepreneurship when they come to the Bay Area and to Boston. And some of them are also starting their companies. In fact, we do see that the most important part of talent development, at least as from an Asian perspective, is to be prepared to accept failure. I think we are starting to do that as a whole country. The reason why I say that is now Singapore is being recognized as a top startup location in Southeast Asia. Even though last year was a winter, Singapore out-competed with the rest of Southeast Asia in terms of fundraise by our startups. The stats speak for themselves. And in that category itself, life sciences is next to fintech, the top category, even though it's a down cycle, because the quality of science and the quality of the research they are doing is as good as in any location in the world. And we have seen that even in up cycle, down cycle, as long as the quality is good, and of course we welcome Flagship in helping us, we'll still continue to punch ahead. We do see that going forward, the entrepreneurial spirit itself will continue. We do see that people are starting to work in startups, and it's okay if the startup blows up and the talent's circulated. I think recently we have a very interesting situation in which one of our promising biotech actually went through that. But what was actually comforting is that talent recirculated, and the talent went through and helped everyone, and new companies were born. And that is the natural thing to do, you know. So if you are keen to find out when is the time that we were going to have our first life science unicorn, I think it's a matter of time.
I wanted to ask the question, but you're saying it's a matter of time. That's
yes,
good.
Because we already have fintech unicorns,
right. Yes,
as well as software unicorns as well.
Right.
I think life science is a matter of time.
But also, some of the most exciting moments in science are when things don't go to plan and when you don't get the results that you were expecting. And that's what is often what drives new discoveries. Just picking up on what you were saying about we shouldn't be afraid to when things don't go as expected.
Yeah, remember still the penicillin many years
and
ago.
many more discoveries, yes.
No, very good. So I'm looking at the audience because I promised to open up for questions, the floor. And it's questions both audience here in the room, but also virtually. So please ask questions. Perhaps we start in the room. Please, gentlemen, here. You wait until you get the microphone, please. Yes.
Hello, my name is Daniel. I'm a founder. I'm about 24 years old. It's my second startup and now in life sciences, specifically in federated data networks and the sharing of data across borders to be able to make them more interoperable and more usable for insights for researchers. Are you thinking about federation at the moment? Is that something that's top of mind for you? And how are you thinking about the interoperability of those data ecosystems to drive research results? Thank you very much.
Excellent question.
Maybe I'll take that first.
Yes.
We do see that data aggregation is definitely very important. But I think within different regions and different countries, they do have their own domestic data laws for privacy purpose. A significant one, of course, is Europe with GDPR. And also within Singapore, we have our equivalent as well. We respect that. There are ways of which still there can be collaboration can be done through different forms of trust technology, such as multi-party computing, different forms of algorithm that allows the data to still be assessed through a metadata analysis mode. And also, I will say that if you have the anomaly taken out and just looking at certain fields, it's still possible to have data pooling as well. I would think that at the end of the day, it is not just about the data restriction per se, but what is the outcome at the end of the day. And I think between Singapore and several countries, we are trying to figure out what is the best way that we can do this that allow us to still conform to our local data privacy laws. And I think there's a lot of opportunity going ahead to do this.
Fully agree. I know, Lucy,
Yeah, I
you
think
have also...
well covered, I think. Yeah. And I also think we should look to emerging technology that will help us in this, for example, as described. So not to try and look forward rather than in the rearview mirror as to how we're going to tackle this.
Yeah, I think my personal opinion is the data privacy laws were set up at the time where the data was perhaps less useful if you would aggregate it, and the downside was much higher. Now through, I would say, computational capabilities and other capabilities, we can make great use and save lives, actually, if we do that.
And that's our policy paper was called Data Saves Lives, but it takes that trust that we're all describing.
Yeah, thank you. Please.
Hi, my name is Adriana Sisley. I work at a nonprofit based in Israel focused on accelerating the health tech and life sciences ecosystem there. So everything that you're speaking about very much resonates. I wanted to better understand, as you think about bridging between ecosystems that have their own strengths and their own weaknesses, how you've seen models effectively do that build upon those strengths and minimize the challenges or weaknesses.
Excellent question.
So for me, I think what your question is so interesting because to me it speaks to team science and to sort of I think sometimes we see a gap between people talking about team science as a nice idea, but actually when you look at some of the rewards and incentives across the system, it doesn't actually play out. So we need to say, how would we move where we recognize that we will move our understanding of health and our across health and life sciences by taking that team approach rather than saying that we need to be perfect at everything. And I think if we can harness that across borders, and we've heard sort of both from across geographical borders but across discipline borders, then I think we will achieve so much more. So it's reaching out to those with strengths and seeing what can others bring, but also actually asking for example, our own institutions. I'm an academic, to say, look at what we're valuing and make sure that we've got that matched up.
So thanks for raising that, and I'll take the opportunity to share what Singapore has done in terms of a program we call Global Innovation Alliance. This is a network of startup nodes across the world that Singapore has connected, including in the Bay Area. And what we have done is using those nodes to bridge startups and companies from different locations of the world towards each other. And one of the nodes actually that A-Star is participating in is in China, in Suzhou, where we actually have a location in the Suzhou Industrial Park. And through it, close to about 3 companies, startup companies from Singapore, both life science and physical science, are projected into China. And likewise, through that node in Suzhou, the Chinese life science companies are also coming out. And we are also helping the nodes across the world, between nodes in Singapore, nodes in Jakarta, nodes in Seoul, nodes in Tokyo, to connect to each other as well. There is also a node in France that we are also connecting. But between nodes, I think what's important is the fact that what you have developed as a product for one country, you need to understand whether would it be taken into another region. You have to get into the region to customize and to reform. And that is something not easily done unless you have a support ecosystem that can help you pre-position before you go in. So I would say that this is something that we are talking to Flagship about their network of portfolio companies from Boston into Asia. And I offered them, if you want to work with Singapore, we can also help them looking at in China and Southeast Asia as well. Likewise, I think we're also looking at nodes in UK because, as I mentioned again, the world is really the opportunity. And I think with data today, it's actually much more easy for different parts of the world to be able to access product or solution. I mean, a lot of us who have never bought something online, I never bought anything on Amazon until COVID, and now it's just like that, you know. Likewise, if with technology, with data now, you can actually even crowdsource needs. You can even crowdsource solutions, and with that itself, it actually takes away certain infrastructure, you know. So I think there is a lot of opportunity now post-COVID, because the world, you think about Zoom, you think about online, you think about data, the barriers of infrastructure has come down. I think the pace of innovation will have to catch up, and that's where, from a policy perspective, is whether can the policy makers, you know, be prepared to be more adaptive, to be able to put solution faster, realizing it's going to be a trade-off between risk as well as benefits, you know. But I think there's something we can do it in a meaningful manner in conversation with the whole community.
I think Lucy,
just briefly, we should look around and look where the global burden of disease is and say, what is the collective might here? And in all the companies that are represented, it's absolutely essential that we go out on that team approach and partner with, particularly, say, in the Global South, but particularly for those where the disease is, because that's how we're going to make the biggest difference. So I think it's incumbent on all of us to think about science from a very global perspective and see what we can do on the world stage.
Yes, and if I may add, in other industries outside healthcare, I would say they are more advanced in terms of ecosystem thinking. In my previous life, I've been leading our advanced industry sector that includes semiconductors, automotive, and so on. And there they have slivers, actually. Like in semiconductors, you have in Taiwan, for instance, doing the foundries, but they don't usually do the whole entire product. It's someplace else, and they assemble it like in another country, and they test it in another country. And this is much more prevalent, I would say.
But you also see where you can do leapfrogging of innovation. And that's exciting.
I agree. That's a great opportunity. And that's where the ecosystem thinking is so important. Excellent. So I'm seeing that the time is off. Unless there is any urgent question in the room or virtually, I would like to thank our panelists. It was excellent. I learned a lot. And I would like to actually close with a quote again from Nuba Afeyan, because you asked about the poly crisis. So the way he sees that, and I fully agree, the moment of crisis, and especially if the crisis is high and it's multiple, and it is also an opportunity for poly opportunity. So it creates opportunities to do things differently. Absolutely. And not do things because we have been doing that for many, many years. And I think especially in this space is also the question, the learnings, whether they are additive or do they replace certain things that are perhaps not as effective anymore, and to differentiate that, because I have seen usually it's always additive and then the complexity goes up, speed goes down. Yeah. So this, and I think our discussion also shows the benefits of thinking globally, connecting ecosystems globally, sharing best practices, finding opportunities to collaborate with the end in mind, as Lucy is saying. And literally, I think COVID proved that we can do it if we want it. So with this, I want to thank you again. Thank you also to the audience, also virtually and in the room. And I really look forward that in next year's JP Morgan conference, we can celebrate more successes based on this. So thank you very much.
Thank you, André, and thank you to Flagship.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.